If you don't know your numbers, you don't know your business. I learned this the hard way with my first company, so I created NetSuite, the world's #1 cloud business system. NetSuite gives you the visibility and control you need to make smart decisions and grow with confidence. That's why companies who use NetSuite grow 3 times faster than the S&P 500.
Schedule your free product tour right now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Goodstein, and welcome to the Digital Leaders Show. We're talking key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology in hopes of making you a better digital leader. Today, we're discussing the future of the online ads business, plus other technology business headlines for the week. We're live weekly again, every Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific on LinkedIn and YouTube, and the recording is available on major podcast platforms the following week. Thanks to our sponsor, Oracle NetSuite. Their unified cloud business management solution helps organizations operate more effectively and provide real-time visibility into operational and financial performance. IRPA AI members and followers get preferred pricing of 40 to 45% off NetSuite. Just go to irpaai.com/NetSuite to register. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up IRPA AI. It's the Institute for Robotic Process Automation and Artificial Intelligence, as well as the Digital Enterprise Institute. We're a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. My co-host today is Chris Surdak, Senior AI Advisor to IRPA AI, author and consultant, was formerly a White House Chief Transformation Office Advisor, partner for digital transformation at Gartner, and automation AI practice lead at EY. Chris, good afternoon.
Good to see you again, Dan. I feel like there's been 2 dot releases of ChatGPT since the last time we were on.
I know it's been a few weeks, and the world has had a couple more tech shutdowns since we spoke last time, and all kinds of antitrust lawsuits going on, which is kind of the main topic for today. But I know you were at a conference that was very 2020 of you. How'd it go?
I know, in the physical presence of other human beings. I mean, it was very radical. Yeah, information governance world. I think they're in their 4th year. Great session. Lots of folks specifically focused on AI governance, which is all the hot topic now. And so, we all got to get together and lament over the fact that AI is actually ungovernable, but that doesn't mean we don't need to try to do it. So it's a really good session.
So a conference just to say it's inevitable, huh?
Inevitable and ungovernable. So that's a bad combination to present to attorneys, it turns out.
That's funny. Well, lots of headlines. Like I said, speaking of conferences, the Meta Connect conference starts today. Expectations around more kind of AR, VR, mixed reality kinds of things. I'm very intrigued by this headline. We talked about it on a previous show. We have 42 states and territories now are pressing Congress on putting social media warning labels on it.
Well, and I mean, who decides what the warning label says? Who decides where the warning label belongs? On and on and on, the number of questions. And it almost opens up a further Pandora's box of responsibility without accountability, if you kind of follow, which is sort of what we were talking about with the governance folks last week around AI. For Meta and the whole VR world, I was working with Aurasma when I was with HP over a decade ago. So there was some really advanced technologies 10 years ago. And we had some pretty cool use cases. But even to today, I don't see a lot of those use cases having manifested. So, if we have a technology that seems really cool and sexy and so forth, that's been around for a decade and it hasn't really made it out into the mainstream, you kind of have to wonder why, which I guess is the question that comes to mind for me.
Some news coming out from X, formerly Twitter. A couple related stories. One was this piece in Wired where they basically said that X has got this Grok AI now that is, if you look at the terms and conditions, is basically scraping everything you post and follow and click and tweet or whatever on X. So, what do you do about keeping your posts out of that AI engine? But the other thing that came out this week, which is kind of a scary parallel, which is they finally released their most recent transparency report. They call it. It's the first one since Musk took over from Twitter. Twitter used to do this every 6 months or so. And in the first half of this year alone, X received 67 million reports of hateful conduct and took action on over 2,000 accounts. When you put those two stories side by side, it's kind of concerning.
Without question. And then when you throw, one of the challenges with AI is it's all built on neural networks, which are inherently not transparent. They're inherently opaque. You put an input in, some output comes out, and you have no idea how you came up with that output, which is why we were jokingly saying at the conference last week, you want to govern this technology, but it's ungovernable. So that, the phrase that we kind of came up with out of the blue over there in the conference was, this is the technology that you can describe, but you can't explain. And somehow you have to get comfortable with that notion that I can describe how it behaves, but I can't explain how it behaves. The idea that Grok is that X is scraping everything that we do and copying everything that that's 10 years old. That's what this entire industry is based upon. So no one should be surprised by that. And it's funny you bring this up now because, again, last week at the conference, it came out that LinkedIn had sent a notice to almost all their users that they were now scraping all of your activities and all your posts and all your connections and messages on LinkedIn into generative AI from Microsoft and OpenAI. And when they sent out the consent for you to say, yes, I'm okay, or yes, or no, I'm not okay, everyone was defaulted to yes. So you had to open the message that came to you. You need to go and proactively turn it off. Otherwise, they're scraping everything that you got. This is normal. This is the way it's been for, again, well over a decade. So, I don't know.
Yeah, and I'm usually pretty defensive of technology as it relates to these, the innovation behind some of this stuff. But yeah, when you marry up the fact that you could argue social media in general, Twitter always, maybe even more so in the last couple of years, X, is maybe not the most representative sample set for what you want this to become. And then Sam Altman this week. Is people are kind of looking at a blog post that he made saying that we're much closer, maybe years away from, this infamous super intelligence that everybody's been kind of concerned about. And a lot of people in our industry have been saying, hey, that's sci-fi and it's really far away. Well, he has this post this week about, it's not as far as we think. So, people are kind of looking at that saying, hey, is that, just his opinion? Or is that indicative of something that they're working on at OpenAI? So you have that kind of headline with these headlines and you think, okay, maybe you got to slow this down a little bit.
So I guess I have two responses to that. The first being Sam Altman's trying to pull in something like $20 billion of additional funding because right now, they have a negative cash flow of $5 billion. So I might be willing to make some fairly hyperbolic statements if I was trying to scare up $5, $10, $15 billion of funding.
Good point.
Yeah. My other response to that would be, as you just said a moment ago, Twitter is a complete trash heap of human communication. But what is he training OpenAI on? A few trillion tweets. So if he thinks he's generating a super intelligence, my tendency would think he's actually creating the world's greatest stupefaction engine we've ever created. Right, because you're training it to be optimally Twitter. He's probably not getting all that smart.
So on the other side of the doom and gloom part of all this innovation, I saw this great, really, really great article. This was also in Wired about a brain implant that they're testing to allow people to control Amazon Alexa with their minds. This is stuff out of sci-fi for sure, and it's actually a Neuralink rival. So Elon Musk's rival. Synchron is the name of the company. But this is, talking about, in this case, an ALS patient who's lost, mobility and even, I guess, most voice speaking capability, and actually testing this out. I mean, this is amazing stuff.
The cybernetics, we've always talked about the possibility of cybernetics. The fact that we're rapidly approaching that shouldn't be terribly surprising. But there too, I mean, not to be the naysayer, but just to point it out as an engineer, these tools obviously learn as you interact with them, right? There's some baseline capability, and the more that particular patient interacts with that cybernetic connection, the more it learns how that person operates and how they think and how to read their brain and so forth. So I would argue it, great, that person's controlling Alexa, but to what extent is Alexa going to control him in return? As long as that feedback mechanism is there, that possibility is over there, which takes me back to the discussion of how do we govern this technology effectively, embrace all the positives that come with it. It's going to do amazingly good stuff, but then also protect us from the inevitable negatives that come along with it.
Chris, I set that up as the non-doom and gloom, man. You still brought it back there.
No, it's absolutely not. Well, and I always get that gun pointed at my head that I'm a naysayer and I'm against the technology. I'm completely for the technology. I'm against doing bad things with the technology or allowing the technology to do bad things.
Yeah. And the last headline before we get to our main topic that I pulled out is related to Amazon. Actually, Amazon kind of broke the internet over the last week when the CEO said everyone's got to go back to the office full-time, not part-time, full-time. So that 2-day-a-week thing that many companies were or are doing, now people are saying that this may be the beginning of the end of that. Goldman Sachs followed suit pretty quickly, as did a bunch of other large tech companies. So this truce between management and workers around a part-time remote hybrid work may have been broken.
Well, and I think once that seal was broken, I don't think you can undo, right? The genie's out of that bottle. I don't know that there's probably a significant proportion of the workforce that is going to never go back to traditional working. But I think it also may imply something that many of us probably suspected. For some proportion of us, I think we became much more productive in this model. But I think a lot of people kind of took advantage of it to a certain extent, or in many ways, their productivity, however you may measure it, wasn't what we had hoped for. And so it should, anytime you do something really transformational, and work from home across the entire society was pretty transformational, you're going to learn things or get insights that weren't possible until you actually did it. Like you couldn't model what the results were going to be until you actually did it. You could guess. So I think some of this may be the backlash of recognizing overall productivity suffered, and people's ability to interact with each other and be useful humans probably suffered as a result of this. But it's going to be interesting to see what proportion of people are willing to go back and what the impact on overall productivity will be as a result.
So our main topic today is the future of the online ads business, sparked by this past week. Google is defending its ad business in an antitrust lawsuit against the U.S. Department of Justice. But it's been a big few months for antitrust cases in general. Over the past year, Google's lost 2 other antitrust trials around search and mobile app store monopolies. Apple and Google both in the EU court, losing their antitrust cases. And then just yesterday, the markets kind of got shocked by the Department of Justice now filing a lawsuit against Visa as well. So these things are seemingly ramping up, becoming headlines every week. This most recent one is significant, right? Because it's I would say almost the way the internet is built right now, with Google and its ad empire, I'll call it for now. It's a $12 billion business in the U.S. alone. And 17 states, in addition to the federal government, are planning on jumping in. to this. So it's really going to be an interesting tsunami, whatever the result is.
It makes me think of a funny quote I heard last week at the conference. Americans innovate, Europeans regulate, and Chinese replicate. Right. And so, I mean, you're always going to see a lot more aggressive, if you will, enforcement actions out of the EU. But I mean, the US has been heading in this direction for quite some time. So I don't think it's terribly surprising. I also don't think it's terribly surprising for people to acknowledge that Google is a monopoly, particularly in the search space. And how do you pay for the search that they provide? It's by advertisements. But I mean, what percentage of people do you know that go around saying, go Bing that, or go DuckDuckGo that? They're the outliers, like 1 or 2%. There's no question that Google dominates in this space, and hence Google must inevitably dominate in the ad space that's related to it. The monopoly sort of litigation and so forth coming from the government is always something that you have to be very careful about, and it's always a tough argument to make, because what do you end up after the fact? What do you end up with after the fact? And is it going to, if you break it up, is it going to be better? Is it going to be cheaper? There is something to be said for that single point to go for any kind of search. It's both a point of strength and a point of weakness. So not terribly surprised that it's happening. Wouldn't be terribly surprised if we get maybe some good results or potentially some bad results. Not to be,
the ad thing is interesting to me. Like I've always been, and I think even on this show we've talked about, Amazon, right, and all the different verticals that they've gotten into, and whether that constitutes a monopoly or not. I'm always kind of cautious around, the blurring of what is dominance through innovation and good business versus what is a monopoly and unfair, competitive landscape. But the ad business is more interesting when you kind of dive into this. So let me set this up for you, Chris, for those that maybe didn't read this article or hasn't followed the Department of Justice.
I did.
No, I'm saying for the audience, who hasn't. So the government's saying that DoubleClick, which is the company that Google acquired in 2007, essentially enabled Google to corner websites into doing business with its other services. And so they allegedly are monopolizing the big three pieces of the digital advertising supply chain. So they have a pool of captive publishers, fewer alternatives, substantial switching costs associated with changing from one publisher to another, and their global market share of publishers is 91%. That includes brokers and tools used by advertisers, according to these court filings. And that these, the accusation is that these publishers, would be receiving, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars more, but they're being kind of starved out of funding and pushed to put more ads on their websites, based on Google's kind of business models. And there's a group of people, some of them just kind of industry experts who Wired spoke to for this article, who are saying that this is good for users. It could be a more informed, better entertainment, more competition, lower fees, lower costs. If this was kind of broken up and more fair. Google's basically saying, we may have a big market share, but we're still competing with Meta, Amazon, Microsoft. Businesses have benefited from the cost of acquisition and the access that they've given the marketplace. And back to, like I said, about innovation, right? That they've designed a set of products that just work efficiently together, and help publishers and advertisers generate more revenue than they would if they had to do this in 1,000 different, outlets.
As you all know, most of my career as an engineer, and I later went to law school because I do a lot of stuff in the legal space. And the hardest thing about going from engineering to the legal world is, in engineering, you ask a question, there's one right answer and infinite wrong answers. In the legal world, there's good and bad arguments, and there is no right or wrong arguably. It's, can you make a good argument or not? So the arguments that both sides are making on this are all valid to at least some degree. You're not going to make an invalid argument in your place. But I think all of us know this as consumers of these particular platforms. I don't go to Meta to place a search for something if I'm trying to find, I don't know, camping gear in my local area. I don't go to Google to do social media and see what my cousins are up to on the other side of the planet, right? So there's an argument that in the overall ad space, these companies are competitive with each other, but the segment within each of them they are dominant, and the other platforms really have no space there, right? Kind of think of the Amazon model as well. So I think, you can make the arguments that there is competition for overall ad spend, but in each niche of how we consume content and participate on the internet and hence get advertised to, it's highly verticalized, highly concentrated in the handful of, we call these companies big tech for a reason. They're worth $6, $7, $8 trillion for a reason. It's extraordinarily valuable to have that kind of dominance.
So, you have the business, aspect of it, the business side of it. And then you have just the kind of, I alluded to it before, but the user experience. And it's more than user experience, right? It's the, because this is like, Google and search has become the platform for which we run society essentially at this point. Although it is changing, right? You see some of the stats where, the younger generations, go to things like TikTok and other places to start their search instead of Google, which has its own set of ramifications and concerns. But, essentially what they're saying is, because Google has monopolized this, the quality of websites and the quality of content, this is what some of the critics are saying, the quality of ads and the amount of clutter is being created, the clutter on the internet is being created by this model. And, I've experienced it. We've all experienced kind of clickbait, right? In one form or another, but even major media companies who I consider reputable and go to for information, you scroll to the bottom of their page and after their main headlines, they're ads, right? It's clickbait ads. And you start wondering like, how does the average reader, see that? And so, we had another show on, the concerns over content and what makes information factual versus factual. That's another topic. But, is there actually potential for an internet that's less ad driven? Is that one of the potential outcomes here?
Well, to answer the latter first, absolutely not, because each of us perceive the internet as being free and it costs trillions of dollars to operate it. So, I remember almost a decade and a half ago, the phrase, if you didn't pay for it, you're the product.
Yeah.
Right. So all these supposedly free services that you're consuming all the time, someone's got to pay for them, and it comes from ad spend. The other, I think the argument that goes for saying that Google has improper market power and all this is not the pop-up. We think of advertising, we think of the pop-up windows or the little, click boxes and all that kind of stuff. That's not the advertising where the preponderance of Google's money comes from. The preponderance of their ad spend comes from search term ranking, right? And so if you're going to sell a product or you're going to provide a service, the very first thing that you do is you set aside budget and you capture first, second, third place in search results from Google. And that doesn't look like an ad. It's got the little thing, ad next to it, but it's just a click, and you click on it, and that's where the bulk of it comes from. It's actually, it's somewhat nefarious, right? You think you're picking up terms that other people said this is the best possible term for what you're searching for, and it's not. The first 5 or 6 are just who spent the most money to capture that result. And that's I think the part where there's a strong argument that they have inappropriate levels of power over this particular market.
Yeah, and it's funny you kind of use those examples. I was reading an unrelated thing this week about a medical condition of a friend of mine, and I was reading into this this paper by this expert in this particular area, and his estimate, it wasn't a scientific study, but his estimate was that 85% of the content online about this particular disorder was factually incorrect. And he attributed that to two things. One is user generated stuff, everybody in a discussion forum, whatever, having an opinion that they think is fact, which has been around since the beginning of chat rooms. But the other is the business model of the internet. He said that, the majority of the advice out there is either directly or indirectly paid for by companies that are selling a product. And so it's not always obvious right away that information is provided for the purpose of selling you, that product, whether it's a drug or, whatever it is. But, he said 85%. So, even if he's partially correct that it's more than 50%, and that's just one industry, one medical disorder. Right. So, and I think that's what some of the folks that are critics of this are saying is, hey, they're really monopolizing not only the ad business, but by virtue of their search monopoly, access to information. And so some are saying, hey, competition would actually lower the fees, increase innovation. There'd be better monetization of websites, better quality content on websites, and essentially a better browsing experience.
I did a tiny bit of political consulting many years ago, and I used to joke that the truth starts on page 11 of Google search results. The first 10 pages is all propaganda, paid for. If I'm not kidding, I mean, go into Google, do a search on something somewhat controversial, and compare page 1 and 2 results with page 11, and it'll blow your mind. If you can get to page 11 these days. There's so much filtration on a lot of Google stuff now that they just, after the first 3 or 4 pages, they just give up, because 90+% of the time by page 2, most of us give up. We don't look past page 1 or 2. So that's the, our behavior is the incentive for Google doing what it does. And there's a very symbiotic relationship there, I think. I also used to joke many years ago, back when Google had the company motto, do no evil. If a company has to have a motto that says do no evil, what do you think they're doing?
If it's not already obvious, right?
Well, welcome to the Empire Strikes Back, right? And now they're so evil that they drop that as their motto. That's when they're doing some really bad stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and so, like you said, there's really interesting debate, arguments on both sides. So, some advertising experts that were interviewed for this article saying that, if Google is broken up, that experiences are going to get, get worse. You could actually have more invasive tracking because competition will intensify. Products in theory could even cost more because the cost of running ads and hiring enough people to run ads on different platforms and learn different platforms just to achieve the same goal, the cost will go up. And claiming that the ad clutter, if you will, actually get worse because it's not controlled by, essentially one organization that has a great mission statement of not creating any evil.
Do no evil. I think those are all incredibly valid points. The question is, are they transitory? Yeah, it would be, if you broke up Google, you'd have a lot more different platforms to go to. It'd be a lot more expensive initially. There's no question that would be a major transformational cost associated with it. But we got to look at the long-term effects. And over the long term, are people going to be better off? And would it eventually become more efficient because it's more competitive? I think there's strong arguments for both. And again, not to prevaricate, but I mean, that's why these sorts of decisions should be taken very seriously and a long time thinking it over before we pull the trigger one way or the other.
Yeah, I also wonder about the timing of all of this, right? I mean,
it comes up during an election year. You got to be kidding me.
Politics aside, although that's a good point, right? Election year, right? But even politics aside, why now? I mean, they've had, you could argue dominance or monopoly, whatever you want to call it, is not new. It's not even like new this decade. I don't think. I don't know what the market share trend was. If it was whatever 85% 10 years ago, I don't know. But aside from the fact that this actually did pass antitrust regulators in 2007, which, a couple of them have said was a mistake. This is not new, right? And so, why now? And, what are some of the bigger, implications of this seemingly crusade on big tech that's going on now, around just innovation and kind of advancements in technology and AI and in general.
Well, I think you touched on a lot of different points that are driving it. Point one, the world is a lot different now than it was back in 2007. And I think some of the changes that have occurred from social media, from big tech, more recently AI, cloud computing, et cetera, some of the results were pretty predictable, but there's also a bunch of unintended consequences for sure. So those people that look back on that 2007 decision 15 years, 16, 17 years hence, and are kind of like, ooh, boy, we missed the boat on that. Shouldn't be too surprising. I think that the increased enforcement, a lot of people, particularly in the US, particularly in governance and compliance, have noticed extreme increases in enforcement activities by the US government in particular, but also in Europe. Federal Trade Commission has been doing a lot of enforcement around privacy, specifically targeting really big tech-ish kind of companies. And that's, I think, a reflection of the understanding that these companies have tremendous amount of power because they control information, but also, hey, we're cranking up our national debt by $100 billion every 30 days or something like that, or $1/3 trillion every $1 trillion every 100 days. We got a revenue problem, and hey, enforcement is potentially a way of dealing with that revenue problem. So, yeah, I think it's a multifaceted reasoning for why it's happening now. Is it going to be maintainable is a serious question, because I mean, we're talking about extraordinarily powerful companies. I have an announcement like FANG. If it was a company, if you took the market cap of FANG, the big tech companies, and you compared it to the GDP of all the countries in the world, it would be FANG would be the 5th largest company or country comparative by GDP. It's like big, it's almost as big as, it's bigger than Germany and France, and almost as big as Japan, something like that. So there's a gargantuan amount of power concentrated in these companies. And it's not surprising the governments are looking to potentially break that up, just from feeling somewhat threatened, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, aside from, as if the future of search and advertising and content and AI wasn't a big enough topic in itself, I think you're right. I think this is, the other reason I'm watching this carefully is I think this is truly a inflection point in the debate, over kind of balance between market dominance and competition. It's very clear to me that the current administration is looking to change the definition of monopoly from what it historically has been, which is vertical based, and now it seems like it's more about competitive fairness and, like you say, kind of not allowing companies to have too much power and those sorts of things. But yeah, I think this is going to set some big precedent. If the Department of Justice wins, this will not be the last suit of its kind. There will be a whole long tail of additional suits across multiple industries, tech industry, as well as adjacent industries like that Visa headline we started with. But if Google wins, it also sets a really big precedent for market position and the regulatory landscape as well, that may allow other companies to follow suit. So really interesting timing on this.
One parting thought is, if OpenAI, Sam Altman, Microsoft are willing to operate OpenAI, ChatGPT, at a $500 million a month loss, which is what they're doing right now. I mean, in effect, ChatGPT is a arguably AI-based search engine. It's viewed as potentially the competitor to Google. And so if we're looking at the almost reckless investment that's going into generative AI right now. It's over the potential of taking over search from a Google. And that's an indication of how valuable that dominance of something as simple as search really is, that companies are willing. I did a rough analysis, and the ratio of investment in generative AI versus revenue generated is between 200 and 300 to 1. That's not the profit margin of about 0.5%. That's the revenue generation. So that's the level of gamble that people are willing to take on generative AI potentially being the replacement for search and Google in search. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I know I want to do a separate show on that, the cost and ROI of AI innovation. I know you have a lot of research on that, and I think that's worth its own kind of hour. But you're right, and I think that's the argument that Google is going to make here, which is, we might have this market share today, but you have the statistics around certain generations starting on YouTube, which is also owned by Google, but certain generations starting searches on Facebook and Meta-owned properties. You have the younger generation starting search on Instagram, which is Meta, and on TikTok, which, by the way, you're also going after to shut down. So if you shut down Google search as it is today, and there is competition. I think they're trying to argue, and increasingly there will be competition, OpenAI especially, and others like it. But you also have this societal issue of, okay, well, if you stop Google search the way it is today, and you stop OpenAI, and you shut down TikTok, it'll be back to the wild, wild west. Is that good?
It'd be like caveman days. It's like, oh, we're not going to produce gasoline anymore all of a sudden. Right. I myself miss using Alta Vista. I'll just put that out there.
No, I was going to ask Jeeves guy.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, if difficult problems are difficult to answer. So, I mean, I'm not the least bit surprised, but I think there's a lot of combined forces that are bringing it up at this particular time, to your earlier point, which is, concentration of power, market value, a degree of technology stagnation. I mean, when's the last time Google really innovated in anything? I mean, they started to kind of fail a little bit in the chase for AI. They're bouncing back a little bit, but, breaking them up might be very cathartic for them. They're having a midlife crisis, perhaps.
Interesting stuff. So we'll keep watching this, and keep reporting back. We're back to doing weekly shows now, back from the summer. So we'll be back next week, Wednesday, noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. In the meantime, if you want to schedule a free automation or AI program health check or industry briefing with one of our subject matter experts like Chris, go to IRPAai.com. Check out IRPAai.com for more resources as well. Chris, have a great week. Have a great week, everybody.
Likewise. Take care.